So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director and founder of La'asok. La'asok is the liberal Beit Midrash. We're a house of study where we come together to engage with each other and with Judaism and with Jewish texts, approaching Judaism through inclusive, progressive eyes. And today I'm very pleased and very excited to welcome one of our favorite teachers at La'asok, Rabbi Nikki DeBlosi, to talk about queer inclusion in Judaism. Before we start, I want to mention a few partners and people who made this program possible. First of all, a huge thank you to those who made a donation to La'asok when you signed up for the program. Thank you for ensuring that we can continue to offer inclusive, progressive Jewish learning. If you appreciate this program, please do consider a donation to La'asok. And I'm just going to drop in the chat how you can do so. We'll drop that in again later in case it gets lost, but it's very much appreciated, and that enables us to be able to continue to offer this kind of programming, progressive, inclusive Jewish learning. Next, I also want to thank 3 partner organizations for making this program happen. The Union for Reform Judaism, and we'll call on them in just a moment. A Wider Bridge. I'm just going to drop all of their information into the chat. And Keshet. Each of these 3 organizations is working in its own way to build a vibrant and inclusive Jewish future and Jewish present, and I'm grateful to have all of them as partners in this work that we're doing. Along those lines, I'd like to turn things over for a moment to Rabbi Julie Zupan of the Union for Reform Judaism for a brief greeting. Rabbi Zupan, please.
Thank you. I'm Julie Zupan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a rabbi on staff at the Union for Reform Judaism. We're delighted to sponsor this online experience from La'asok and grateful to you, Rabbi Streifer, for bringing us together today to learn with Rabbi Nikki. The Union for Reform Judaism is committed to building a world in which Judaism enables all people to experience peace and wholeness, justice and equity, belonging and joy. A key value of the URJ is our shared humanity. We see everyone, every human being is created in the divine image, and as such strive to treat everyone with respect, dignity, and kindness. And I know this concept is very much at the heart of our learning today. So we're glad that you're all here, and I'm so happy to be here with you and to be learning with Rabbi Nikki. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you to Rabbi Julie for those greetings and to the Union for Reform Judaism for its partnership and sponsorship of this program, as well as I mentioned before, A Wider Bridge and Keshet. The Keshet organization asked us if we would share a resource with all of you, first to lift up the work that they're doing, as well as because this might be useful to some of us. So I'm just dropping into the chat a resource from Keshet that's called How Your Jewish Community Can Be a Safe Haven for Trans People. I hope you'll download it, take a look at it. There's some really important information in there as well. And now, without any further ado, I'll introduce our teacher. Rabbi Nikki DeBlosi, she, her pronouns, connects folks to the breadth and depth of Jewish tradition through inclusive, innovative, and insightful Jewish teaching, speaking, and ritual. She is a tattooed, polyamorous, queer, suburban, stay-at-home parent. Rabbi Nikki was raised Catholic and converted to Judaism as an adult. She's an avid reader, especially romance, and a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and a choral singer. And I'll just mention that if you really enjoy studying with Rabbi Nikki and you're looking for a regular opportunity to study Torah with her and to study Torah through a clear lens, then I would invite you to consider signing up for the study group that she'll be leading through La'asok starting in October, which is called Queering the Weekly Parsha. And I'll put that into the chat as well. If you have any questions or want to connect about that, you can reach out to me through the chat or reach out to me by email. I'm going to invite you to join me in the blessing for study. So let's say this blessing together, and then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Nikki for our session together. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav b'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring holiness to our lives, and who commands us to immerse, to engage, la'asok, in words of Torah. Rabbi Nikki DeBlosi, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Micah and Rabbi Julie, for that introduction, and a thank you to our colleagues at Keshet and A Wider Bridge. It's really great to be with all of you today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the concepts we're going to look at. We're going to talk a bit about belonging and how it differs from fitting in. We're going to talk about the received cultural messages that we each bring about LGBTQI plus, etc. community. I'm going to introduce some concepts from queer theory. I have an academic background in cultural studies and queer theory, both as an undergraduate and through my master's and doctorate that I did at New York University. And I'm going to talk a little bit about acceptance and how and why it is important to differentiate acceptance and tolerance. Tolerance being kind of a word that we hear a lot. And I'll just, spoiler alert, not my favorite word, tolerance. There will be time for questions and reactions. As Rabbi Micah said, you are welcome to put things in the chat. I'm going to try to not look at the chat so I don't distract myself from the very huge amount of material that I'm trying to cover in this hour and 15 minutes. But I will ask my colleagues to keep an eye on it. So if there's a question that keeps coming up repeatedly, they will let me know so I can stop and address it. And there will be other times also that I ask folks to include things in the chat. If it feels too vulnerable or too private to answer directly as yourself in the chat, you can feel free to direct it to one of the other rabbis on the call so that they can share it on your behalf in the chat. Okay, so that's all the sort of housekeeping stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about belonging, and I'm going to try real hard to share my screen because I made some slides for you all. And let's see how that goes. So, is it showing? I don't know. We're going to try. Hold on one moment. This is the part that's always when my children make fun of me because they say, don't you know how to use the sharing? What is happening? All right, we'll try it this way. Is this showing for you guys? You're seeing, okay. I'm not sure if I can make it look pretty. So why does queer inclusion matter to any of us? I'm going to start with the idea of belonging, and many of us might know, thanks for that tip, might know the work of Brené Brown, which has become more and more, I think, popular these days. Both her work on belonging and generally on vulnerability and topics like that. So we have this quote from The Gifts of Imperfection. And I've obviously directed us to particular parts here, but I want us to listen and think about how it might relate to us. So Brown writes, belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging is not being afraid to stand out in the crowd. True belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Okay, I'm sorry that I couldn't get that to present the right way, but someday the person who was giving me advice, I will listen to your advice and figure it out. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. So there is a difference, I think, between changing who you are and being who you are, right? So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story from my own childhood about the 1990s. So some of you may be children of other eras, but I'm a child really of the 90s. That's when I was in college. And when I was first starting to come out, at the time I came out as gay. We can discuss later how all of us have different words that we use to refer to ourselves at different times in our lives, and that's okay, right? No one should say to us, but you used to identify as X, right? I mean, I also used to identify as a future veterinarian or a future unicorn when I was 7. And nobody holds me accountable for not becoming those things right now as an adult. But I started wearing this necklace, one of those little ball chain necklaces, and it had 6 individual little rings on it, one of each color of the Roy G. Biv rainbow. And I called them my rainbow rings. And it was really my way of trying to hint when I was in public spaces that I belonged to an LGBTQ plus community. And I felt safe wearing them because I figured my parents didn't know what it meant to wear a rainbow. So I could do this thing, and it could be kind of a way of coming into myself, coming into this new community, but have very low stakes. So then my father heard a rumor that rainbow meant gay. Oh my gosh. And he came to me one day, and like when I say out of the blue, pointed to the rainbow rings and said, "Why do you have to advertise your sex life?" I was a first-year student in college. And as I said to my father, I assure you my sex life is entirely theoretical. I haven't even figured out how to ask a girl on a date. I'm not advertising my sex life at all by wearing this rainbow necklace. And I said, but you wear a gold ring on the 3rd finger of your left hand. And that means that you have sex with my mom, your wife. Why do you have to advertise your sex life like that? It was the first moment for me articulating something that I later learned in a different way in gay and lesbian studies classes, queer theory classes, which is that there is a way that gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer bodies are sexualized in public spaces that doesn't match up to the way that straight bodies are sexualized. For my father to be accused of flaunting his sexuality in public, he would probably have had to engaged in sex with my mother in public. God forbid. Thankfully, they never did that. Certainly not in front of me. For me to be considered flaunting my sex life, I wore 6 different colors in a row on a necklace. Right. And I was shoving it into people's faces. I was sharing something too personal with the entire world. Right. All of the things that a lot of LGBTQ plus people here said. And I'm not surprised that we hear it said. If you look at some of the United States Supreme Court or SCOTUS cases about gay rights, they really hinge on the idea of privacy. Right. Why should we impose on someone's private life? But there are so many ways in which how we love, how we express our gender, how we express our own identities and sexualities, how we ask people out on dates, right, that are at a weird line between private and public. Right. And to say to gay people, anytime you indicate that you are a member of the LGBT community, you're inappropriately taking something private and making it public is not fair. Right. There's what's that word when it doesn't match up on either side, right? There's a double standard applied to gay people, right, as to straight people. On the other side of that, we might think about the ways in which groups of people are desexualized, right? So it wasn't awesome for my father to tell me, why are you advertising your sex life? Take off that rainbow necklace. But when I had my then girlfriend, now my wife, over for Christmas at my parents' house, and my sister had her then boyfriend over for Christmas at my parents' house, and it was time to go to bed, my mother said to me and my wife, Rachel, "Good night, girls. See you tomorrow. Hope everything is okay upstairs." We start walking up the stairs to my bedroom. My sister and her boyfriend start walking upstairs to my sister's bedroom, and my parents say, "Excuse me, no boys upstairs." There is a moment where that double standard is applied in a different way that kind of benefited me, right? My parents didn't care if I slept in the same bed with my girlfriend at their house under their roof, but they did not want my younger sister to sleep upstairs with her boyfriend. My budding queer activism at the time was a lot higher. I'd already taken my intro to gay and lesbian studies class, English 197, taught by Dr. Ann Pellegrini, PhD, all pronouns. And so I turned to my parents and said, either you think we're both having sex or not, or neither of us is having sex. By the way, no one's having sex under your roof, mom and dad, but it's everybody sleeps downstairs in the living room on the floor, or both of these people get to sleep in our rooms. You can't have it both ways, mom and dad. My sister was like, I don't care, it's fine, la, 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 let's not talk about it, right? But that line between public and private, the standards that are applied to queer bodies versus straight bodies, right? It's different. So I'm curious and want to ask all of you, what are the times in your life when, hold on one second, I'm just trying to make something better happen with my presentation. What are the times in your life when someone has asked you to edit your identity? Now that might mean to edit your identity in a sense of LGBTQ identity or gender identity, but it might mean something else. It might mean your Jewish identity. Any time that someone has asked you to change or edit a part of your identity so that you could be a part of, I don't know, the community that you were in. When have you been asked to edit yourself? Wow. Cantor Marx, to say you're bringing up something really heavy and important, which is there might be a real reason why someone is asking you to edit yourself, and it might be a perception of danger versus safety, right? Is it okay to share? Right? Don't dress like a boy. That's not ladylike. That's an invitation to edit yourself. Oh, I really feel, Jenna, that being told not to be so angry all the time. Right? It's like, why do you have to throw this in people's face? So many of us are told we're too much, right? All of these ways that we are asked to edit our identity. And again, it might be because of any kind of identity category, right? It might be our gender. It might be the birth order that we were in, right? You're not acting like the oldest child. You're supposed to set a good example for your younger siblings. How we speak in public or in private, right? What is told is appropriate. Being excluded from, I'm seeing, Melissa, your response there, being excluded from particular events because our presence will distract everyone from what's really going on, right? And how hurtful that can be. The ways that we're asked to edit to make other people comfortable, right? So I think most of us understand that that there is an unfairness, right, to being asked to edit out our identities. And so I want to look at ways in which it might be Jewish to be asked to edit our identities in ways that we hadn't thought of before, how we might respond to that being a part of our tradition. Sorry, I'm still really distracted by trying to share this.
Rabbi Nikki, if it's
Yeah.
helpful, I can share it from here. I have the PDF and
That's
can
great.
share the
Let's
screen.
do that. So can you share for me, please, the not suspected slide? It's number 4. So this is one of my favorite texts. So one of the things that we know from the Torah is that there's very little directly said about LGBTQ plus identities. And part of why that is because we do not know, we know identity differently than the rabbis of tradition knew identity, right? The words heterosexual and homosexual are coined in the late 19th century. And it is only homosexual is defined first, because we don't need to explain heterosexual. It's the way things are, nature, right? And then, much the way that we didn't have the word Orthodox to describe Jewish folks until we had the word Reform, right? The dominant category goes unnamed, right? It's the thing that people notice. It's my dad wearing a wedding ring, right? We don't call attention to it in that same way. So when we look at the Torah, we see a man shall not lie with another man as one lies with a woman, the verse in Leviticus, which we're not going to talk about in extensive detail today, but this idea that there is a verse that prohibits something, but it doesn't talk about identity in the way that we understand identity now. And I think also the other difficult thing about understanding how Judaism treats sexual identity or sexual orientation, if that were a thing that we could even say about the Torah, is that there's not a lot of Gemara, there's not a lot of Talmudic discussion about that verse. And one of the places where we see Talmudic discussion about that verse, right? Like there's not a tractate on mishkav zachar, on lying with a man or sex with men, that gives us like 32 categories of what that looks like, right? Oh, it looks like wearing a rainbow necklace. It looks like putting a picture of your husband, if you're a man, on your desk, right? We don't have those discussions in the Talmud. What we do have is this text. Rabbi Yehuda says, 2 bachelors may not sleep with one covering, but the rabbis permit it. Okay, I'm going to stop there and ask someone to volunteer what they think it means to say that 2 bachelors may not sleep with one covering. Why would that even be an issue? You can raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute. Amy.
Perhaps they think it's not hygienic.
Maybe it's not hygienic, right? Maybe it's not safe or clean. Cantor Marks.
One person under one covering, you kind of know what's going on or not going on. 2 people under one covering, must be doing something.
What are they doing under there? Is it going to lead to mixed dancing, right? Is the joke that we tell when it's cross sex? What is going to happen, right? 2 people under one covering. The word mishkav zachar, lying with men, sex with men, right? We only know that it means sex because we know that the rabbis use this euphemism of lying down to mean sex. They're not saying directly, here is the part of the body of one person that's being inserted into the other body, or here's the action that you're doing, right? They're not talking about what parts are going where, any of those things, right? They're lying down together. It's only one covering. We don't know what's going on under there. So why is it? So Rabbi Yehuda, right, is saying they cannot sleep under one covering because maybe they would have sex with each other. Something sexual is going to go on. When we say the rabbis permit it, right? This is we see here the fact that that's the rule that we do follow, the rabbis, because we prefer, generally speaking, in Judaism, the majority opinion rather than an individual opinion, right? Except in the cases of someone like Rabbi Hillel, we all do what Hillel says. But here we're saying, well, this outlier, this Rabbi Yehuda, like he's got one opinion, but here's what everyone else says. So what is it that the other rabbis are saying? They said to him, Jews are not suspected of engaging in mishkav zachor. What do we think that means? Feel free to raise your hand. Yes, I see y'all. Mel's.
And it's D actually. Well, D with myself. Hi. So we're just so invisible to the rabbis that they can't even conceive of us being part of the community.
Great. Nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. What else might we glean from this, right? One is they can't even see us. The rabbis of our tradition cannot even see us. Cantor Marks.
Is it that old reverse stereotype that Jews don't do this, Jews don't do that, Jews don't drink, Jews don't do naughty things to each other under the covers?
I think that's exactly right. And our colleague Annie says in the chat also, right? Jews can't be drug addicts, Jews can't be abusers. This doesn't happen among Jews. There's a whole section of Talmud, and I think it's in Nida, about one rabbi saying why you shouldn't leave certain possessions, including your donkey or your wife, at an inn that is where the proprietor is not Jewish, is because he's probably going to do just like gross sexual things to those objects or to your wife, right? Now, I heard about this when I was studying for my adult bat mitzvah, not yet in rabbinical school, and I thought, oh, either this rabbi has a really giant imagination or this rabbi was just really kinky. Like this rabbi, like, you know, it's like, if you thought of it, whose problem is it that you're writing this, right? This pushing off of things that we want to disavow onto other communities and saying, we don't have to even cope with this because Jews don't do that. Those two yeshiva buchers, right? Those nice boys, they're gonna just sleep under the shared blanket, right? And that is also, you know, partly because of something that queer theory calls compulsory heterosexuality. So compulsory heterosexuality basically means like a system whereby you're just expected to be straight. Adulthood means straight. Think about every time you've seen, and I wish it was never, a onesie on a little assigned male at birth boy that says future lady killer or lock up your daughters. I mean, they sell these things online, right? That is, I mean, and then, you know, we talk about drag queen grooming children, right? And sexualizing children. If a child is sexualized in a heterosexual way, our culture doesn't even see it as sexualization. When you are born, you are assigned a sex/gender, and it's assumed to cover your whole life. And so only when something goes wrong or awry or differently do we have to comment on it or worry about it, right? That's the messages that we're getting. So I'm curious, and Rabbi, if you would switch to the next slide, to just ask these questions. What are the earliest messages that you received about queer identities in Jewish community? Were those messages negative, neutral, or positive? And you can pop that in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want to share, especially if you haven't spoken yet. Love to hear from as many folks as possible. Herb.
Yeah, I have if I may, just a comment on the previous passages, because it really shows the Jews versus non-Jews. Now it says Jews and non-Jews, which goes back to the original passage about the prohibition of that in the Torah. Is that now only for non-Jews? Are Jews now not necessary to follow that because they're not suspect of that?
Oh, that's very interesting. So there's a real logical there's a cognitive dissonance that Herb is experiencing that now I'm experiencing too. If Jews are not suspected of Mishkav Zachor, why did God tell us in the Torah not to do Mishkav Zachor? Yeah, we've
no, it's also because
Mishkav
Zachor is also prohibited for non-Jews in the Noahite laws. I think.
So well, that's a great question that I actually haven't looked into, so I have to look into that. But it shows up, Mishkav Zachor shows up in what's called the Holiness Code. It shows up in the middle portion of the middle book of the Torah, in Parshat Kedoshim, in Leviticus, and in Acharei Mot, it shows up again. And so it's the section that says, in particular, it is directed only at Jews in that section where it says, right, you as a people shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. I, the eternal your God, am holy. Here are ways that you can stay holy, right? So, right, why do we talk about it and then not talk about it right at the same time? It's connected to what some folks are saying in the chat. There were no messages. There just were no messages. Let me hear from Cheryl, and then we might move on to some of these other questions.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say. I'm 68, and when I was growing up, LGBTQ plus didn't exist. I mean, those people, in quotes, weren't out there. There were no people like that, and so why would there be any discussion? You know,
Yeah.
I didn't
Yep.
even know about it growing up. It
How do
wasn't
we
until when I was in college that I really, I mean, people joked about it, but you know, it wasn't until I was in college that I met friends that it's like, oh, really? Oh, okay.
how do we even know what's possible, right? When nothing is discussed. Or imagine, right? What if the only message we received is Jews don't do such things, right? How does that help us or harm us in understanding our own identity and sense and our own sense of belonging, right? There's a beautiful book from the early 60s called Ready to Catch Him Should He Fall. And it's a queer community at a bar in England. It's a fictional novel, but one of the characters is a late teen, early 20s character who is just a boy in the book, and he's at the underground. He's in the underground, and he's looking at an ad, and it has a beautiful hill, and the boy is imagining what's on the other side of the hill. You can't see over the hill, right, to the next horizon. And the ad, like whatever it's an ad for, has been ripped off the bottom, but the slogan is, "Don't you just wish?" And this character is basically saying, I knew I wanted something different. There's a horizon I wish for, like, but I don't have any idea what it might look like. And so when he sees someone wearing a rainbow, or who walks a certain way, or who looks at him a certain way, he follows that person around London until he ends up at a gay bar, because he thinks, I'm a little different. This person is a little different. I hope they lead me somewhere, right? What happens when there is no message showing us how to live? And when the other message that we get is Jews are not even suspected of that, right? I'm going to ask Herb again for a response, and anyone else who wants to respond to this question. How does this message, Jews don't do such things, affect our own sense of identity?
Okay, when we, the older folks here were growing up, we have a pre-1969 and a post-1969 existence, because Stonewall caused everything to be on television. And they said, oh, look at that. And before that, and continuing on, if you attend synagogue, you know that 3 times a year you have to hear this
Yes.
this pasuk during the year, on Saturday mornings, and also on Yom Kippur by Mincha. And that's when you heard it. And then after Stonewall, and you heard it, and you realized about yourself, your own identity, right, you had that's where you saw it. And you thought, what do I do now? And what is this all about? It wasn't in banners or anything like that. It was right there in the synagogue where you went when you were a young person. And then you now have to deal with this listening, or even reading, if you're a Baal Koreh, reading it and trying to work it out. And to this day, it's of course very difficult to deal with. Yes. And that's one of the things that I deal with. Yeah.
I really identify with that, Herb. And also Stephen Greenberg, one of the first out Orthodox rabbis, out gay Orthodox rabbis, writes about that passage and being a Baal Koreh, being the person who actually he volunteered himself to chant those verses on Yom Kippur afternoon. And you know, to spoil kind of the end of our conversation together today, the idea he has there is, he says when he did it, he thought that he might not be able to do it. He might not be able to say the words out loud, or would he be struck down, or would people notice, right? And he says, when I said it, I realized that the Torah was vulnerable to me and I to it in that moment. And to paraphrase him, he says, I realized that we would never truly understand what those verses mean until those who have been harmed by those passages become among its legitimate interpreters. And that is one of my goals as a rabbi and as a teacher, is to tell all of us in the queer community, to tell all of us, no matter what our identity is, that we are legitimate interpreters of the Torah and the Talmud and the Midrash and Jewish literature all the way through, I don't know, Mel Brooks movies. This tradition is ours, and we get to offer the tradition back. I want to just highlight what I just saw in the chat from Miriam Harris Kaplan, reading it using the trope of Eicha, of Lamentations. There is a really powerful nod, right? I've done a thing where basically I ask, we don't read that passage we didn't read it at NYU because we didn't have a Mincha service. And so when we read Nitzavim, the all of us together stand here receiving the Torah, I would have LGBTQ plus folks, I would call them up for an aliyah to the Torah as a way of repairing that moment of hearing those verses on Yom Kippur afternoon. I did that every year when I was there. So I'm going to move us on a little bit to some concepts in queer theory, not to take away the power of having this discussion together. I think it's really important. I'm going to ask Rabbi Micah to move to the next slide. So this is a real quick discussion on sex, gender, and desire, right? Our culture continues to suture together sex, gender, and desire as if one of them would predict the other, and as if each of them has like really only two choices. And in some, we'd like to enforce only one choice, right? And queer theory touches on the ways in which we can see that there just is more variation in all of these categories, right? Including in the category of sex, which I want to lift up in particular, the existence of people and other non-human animals who are intersex, meaning that that their body, their chromosomes, their genitals, externally and internally, their hormones, other reproductive organs, do not fit neatly into the category of male or female, right? So some folks say, oh, sex, that's fixed and it is binary. There's only two choices, male and female. Is just scientifically not true. And colloquially, the statistic that some people give is either 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 births of people are intersex. There's a really great book called Inverse Cowgirl, written by the perspective of a woman, an intersex woman. She calls herself an intersex woman. That's really helpful to read. But all of these terms here, right, really just show that there's a lot more variation in human expression than there are male men who are very masculine, who desire feminine female women. Like it's messier than that, right? And there are always new terms that people use, and my guideline for which one is correct. Yes, I've read also Andy Austin that intersex births is as common or perhaps more common than people who are natural redheads, right? Like everybody knows someone who has red hair. You probably know someone who is intersex, right? But it's not something that we discuss, and is something that has been very harmfully medicalized in the past. So that's a quick, I'm going to move us to the next slide and just talk a little bit about some of the big moments in queer history that gay and lesbian studies likes to talk about, right? So we have 19th century German psychologist Richard von Krafft-Ebing coining the term homosexuality. He in turn inspires Magnus Hirschfeld, who is Jewish and who establishes a real safe haven for LGBTQ plus folks. Those are not, the term that would have been used at the time in Germany. It's not until, right, so we have a word for homosexuality in the late 1800s, but it's not until 1973 that the American Psychological Association removes homosexuality as a disorder from its diagnostic and statistical manual. And why does that matter? Part of why it matters is because we really like to pretend as a society that we're just trying to get information. And so we're going to turn to scientists. I mean, I guess now we don't always turn to scientists, but, for information. And so these were the people who were kind of gatekeepers, right, of what was normal and what was abnormal. And they don't mean normal as in statistically normal, right? Like the majority of people. They mean normal as in the ideal, right? And instead, I want us to think about variation being the ideal, right? It's not until 1986 that the US Supreme Court declares laws against sodomy as unconstitutional. So I don't know why it says constitutional instead of unconstitutional. Interestingly, sodomy laws in the United States have varied over time. In my home state of Massachusetts, sodomy was basically defined as any kind of sexual act that wasn't penis in vagina intercourse with the man on top in a married couple, which is different from the rabbi's definition, by the way, of acceptable sex acts. The rabbis say anything a man wishes to do with his wife, he may. Oral sex, anal sex, penis in vagina, him on top, her up top. The rabbis say if it's consensual in a kosher marriage, it's fine, right? So then it's not until 2002 that we, oh, right, that's right. In 1986, right, I was looking at the two, and 1986 is Bowers versus Hardwick, and basically says it's okay to outlaw sex between men in particular, right? In 2002, the Supreme Court reverses that, and that's what leads eventually to the 2013 law that basically legalizes same-sex marriage. And to note that in 2013 is the first time that we have the APA depathologizing gender nonconformity and trans identity. And now this is also really controversial, and I'm really speeding through this, but the idea of medicalization, right, was actually an improvement on the past. So if we could move to the next, oh, we're going to skip this. Sorry, we'll talk about Magnus Hirschfeld another day. So sad. Keep going. If you could do one more slide. So this view and consequence, this is really a distillation of a lot of queer history and queer theory, right? That the Torah, right, where it says mishkav zakar is forbidden, that sex between men or whatever, we're not going to deal with translating that verse. I know that Rabbi Mikey suggested a discussion of interpretations of that. I'd love to do that. I have a whole presentation on how we understand mishkav zakar. There will be a recording also. And so mishkav zakar, that verse in Leviticus, is part of where we get the idea that when we view homosexuality, gayness, queerness, sex acts between people of the quote unquote same sex, people with the wrong gender, the wrong body, whatever it is, when we view it as a sin, the consequence was death, which is harsh, horrible, difficult to deal with, right? To understand that something that is a part of your identity is punishable by death, which, by the way, it still is in some parts of the world, right? Is it's just a really heavy burden to carry around, right? And so when folks are the Enlightenment comes and we're thinking about so-called Western countries, particularly England, since the common law of the British Empire becomes the foundation of common law in the United States, the views changes slightly to it is a crime that is punishable. Right. So you get someone like Oscar Wilde being sentenced to hard labor for being, quote unquote, a sodomite. Right. So the punishment no longer is one that might be dealt out by God, but is one that is dealt by other human beings. Interestingly, the case in the case about gay marriage, Lawrence v. Texas, in 2002, it was two men having a one-night stand, and a neighbor had been complaining about this person and basically sent the cops to his house, and they broke into his house and like catch him in the act of having sex with this partner, right? I think it's really interesting that it was a one-night stand, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally. I think consenting adults can choose what kind of sex they want to have, but the Supreme Court talks about intimacy, privacy, and marriage, right? They turn that relationship into, but it's basically like when straight people get married, so it's okay, we can give them their rights. So there's this move from sin, homosexuality is a sin that deserves death, to this move that homosexuality is a crime deserving of punishment, to the idea then with the sexologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that homosexuality is a disease or a condition that could be cured. And this, goes all the way through to Freud and both psychoanalysis and modern psychology. It's part of why some of us in the reform movement have been really uncomfortable that, part of the boundary before becoming ordained as a rabbi in many Jewish traditions today is that you have to undergo a psychological test. Well, that psychological test is by necessity or by definition administered by someone who is trained right up through the American Psychological Association's process, which means we are being evaluated by folks who only decades ago pathologized us and thought that they could cure us, right? And so it's really difficult. We want to protect our congregants and communities from abusers, but is this the best diagnostic tool to use is the question, right? So even someone like Sigmund Freud, it's people who are reading his work who apply it really strictly to imply that all people who are queer, who are different from that norm, are diseased and need to be cured. He has a letter that is from the 1930s that is published that says, basically from a mother of a homosexual person who says, how can I help my son? And Freud says, you know what? If your son is a well-adjusted homosexual, I don't really see what the problem is. You're worried because you've only read about the homosexuals who've come to talk to me. And they've come to talk to me because they are unhappy. Right? So what Freud doesn't do is say, let's change the society, or, hey, there's nothing wrong with being gay, right? What he says is this is a different turn than we expected. Let's help these people. We move a little bit from the idea of disease and cure as the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, starts to redefine, right, our identities as not a pathology, to this idea of it's abnormal, but we tolerate it, right? So it's still different from the norm. It's still that when a child is born, you say it's a girl or it's a boy, and you think you know everything that means. Girl, ballet, crushes on I don't know, Justin Bieber in the future. Boy, he's gonna play football. I don't know if he's gonna be into Taylor Swift. I'm not sure who the boys like these days. My children assure me that they like nobody. Great. They're 14 and 11. But we've got this idea that it is abnormal and we tolerate it. What are some things that you tolerate when you think of the word tolerate? What do you tolerate? You can pop in the chat. Eating fish, a loud noise, bad weather, cilantro, right? Oh, I love this because we might tolerate something that other people really love, right? Tolerating pain from a chronic illness. These are really, right? Some of these are things that, no big deal. Most of them are very unpleasant, right? They're at least a little inconvenient. It's not comfortable, right? I do not want to think of myself and my life as the bad smell in the elevator that you have to deal with because you need to travel up 20 floors. Right? And I do not want my identity to be dictated by someone else's preference, right? Banana pudding. Some people love it. Some people tolerate it. Some people hate it. Some people are allergic, right? We're talking about a person, right? So the move that I want us to make, and it's not just me alone, it's queer activism, it's disability inclusion studies, all of these movements for folks who have formerly been marginalized, criminalized, pathologized in lots of different places, right? Want to say, what if we thought of this as there is variation and everyone belongs? It does not matter how different you are, you still belong. If you want to check out a lovely book about that, Airlie Anderson's book, Neither, is a really beautiful children's book about belonging without having to fit in, right? We all belong if there is room for variation. When someone says, I've never met, and I've literally never gone to a Jewish professional event, except I guess this today, where someone hasn't said, DeBlosi, is that a Jewish name? What does that mean? DeBlosi, is that a Jewish name, right? It might mean I'm curious for your story, because I also have a last name that other people don't perceive as Jewish. But when I was hearing it in the early days of converting to Judaism, in the early days of my rabbinate, I thought, oh, this person thinks I don't belong. They need me to show my credentials. They want to make sure that I'm really Jewish and that I belong here, right? Can we move to the next slide? Are you a member of the tribe? Right, which might mean, let's skip this one as well. Sorry, right. Or are you a safe person for me to talk to, right? There's a lot of ways in which the doctrine of tolerance or the model of tolerance has really helped us, right? But there are other ways in which it hasn't achieved, I think, what folks thought it would achieve, right? Because there is still, as Sarah Rohr is pointing out, there is still an in-group, out-group implication, right? You're in or you're out. I'm trying to think of the name of the book. Oh, Creation's Rainbow, I think it's called. There's a book by a trans biologist who talks about the diversity in nature, not only in terms of gender and sex expression, right? Like, why do we read certain behaviors as masculine or feminine in like birds, right? Imposing a human view on it. So not only in terms of gender expression, sex variation, right? Intersex characteristics as well as male-female characteristics, but also in terms of kind of relationship structure or like the raising of children. So this author talks about, could birds possibly be considered polyamorous? Because there are instances in certain species where a male, a female, and another male who is not the biological parent of any of the hatchlings care for the children together, right? So one of the ways in which we've seen this play out in the gay movement, in the gay rights movement, is that we have, or I'm just going to read from this slide. This is from the Stonewall Uprising film, which was put out by PBS. I highly recommend it, although there's a lot of, I think, downplaying of the contributions of trans women of color in particular to the movement. There's a lot of white gay men featured in the film. We could change that ratio to be a little more accurate historically, but this is Fred Sargent speaking about the first gay pride, which was then the Christopher Street Liberation Day March. Before Stonewall, gay leaders had primarily promoted silent vigils and polite pickets. Since 1965, a small group of gays and lesbians had been picketing outside Liberty Hall. The walk would occur in silence. Required dress on men was jackets and ties. For women, only dresses. We were supposed to be unthreatening. Even gay leader Frank Kameny told two women holding hands that there would be none of that and broke them apart. Right? That's the doctrine of tolerance, thinking if we show straight people that we are so much like them, just this one insignificant detail of same-sex attraction or same-sex sexual activity, that's the only thing that makes us different. Then they'll let us into their club, right? We will show them that we're not trying to threaten anything else, just this one tiny thing that we can keep private. And so then we move to what happens at Stonewall. After months of planning and internal controversy, the Christopher Street Liberation Day Umbrella Committee negotiated with more than a dozen very different gay organizations. Even the question of a chant was endlessly discussed. And the winner, say it clear, say it loud, gay is good, gay is proud. Gay is good, gay is proud is very different from saying we are exactly like you. Let us in so that we can show that we are exactly like you. Look at me, I'm married, monogamous. I dress very simply. I'm a woman, I have long hair, I'm very feminine, I'm soft-spoken, and I have a white picket fence around my house. And I literally have, 2 kids, a dog, and a Subaru in so many ways fitting into the norm. What is the price, right? What is the price of tolerance? It is that we have to edit things about ourselves to seem more like the dominant culture, to be let in. Can we move to the next slide? One of the things I love about being Jewish, number one, is that when I ask folks when we teach about gender, and we did this together with La Asok last year when we talked about the story of Adam and Eve and creation, when I ask folks, what are the characteristics of men and what are the characteristics of women? And we come up with these sort of broad stereotype lists. And then I say, add the adjective Jewish. We often get the opposite, right? So men are powerful, Jewish men are mama's boys. Women are quiet, Jewish women are chutzpahdik. Like, we already do not conform as Jewish people to a lot of notions of gender, sexuality, public, private, all of those things. So then we have, no matter how small we make ourselves, Jen, it will never be enough for the dominant culture. Exactly. I don't want us to have to edit ourselves. If you want to have purple hair and be a rabbi, do it. If you want to wear an entire rainbow outfit, do it. If you want to swish down the street, right? I'm thinking of the Lil Nas X song Swish, where he's playing with ideas of gender and success and basketball and blackness and masculinity and gay identity and rappers, right? And hip hop. I think that's great. So we have this notion in brachot that a person who sees spotted people, someone who is unusual, says, blessed is one who makes creatures different. But the Gemara says, well, if you see someone who's really unusual, they give all of these examples, and I want to acknowledge that some of these examples are really hurtful and harmful when we think about human beings today. And I don't want to speak for anyone's particular identity, but what this person, the Gemara is saying, well, if it's something really unusual, that a person, the later commentaries say that the thing these characteristics have in common is you were born that way. There's that tolerance argument again. You couldn't help it. You were born that way, right? That you say, blessed is the one who makes creatures different. Isn't it beautiful to see variation in the world? Great. But if someone sees a person whose difference happened later in their life or was a change, you're supposed to say, blessed is the true judge. Who knows the other time when we say blessed is the true judge? Or there's a few, but Cheryl.
When you hear that someone has died.
When you hear that someone has died, right? Which is a subset of the broader category, which is when you hear bad news. How can someone's identity and embodiment be bad news? I want to challenge the Gemara and say instead, can we skip to the next slide? Anything about us that comes from God is good news, is beautiful variation. We don't need to think about saying Dayan Emet, the true judge. When we see a person, we need to think about variation, right? So, and we're going to end with that blessing together in a minute. I want to let you know, why do I think I have the authority to speak in this way? And it is not just because I have the signature of a bunch of rabbis on my smicha ordination certificate, but because I learn from other traditions. So Margaret Farley is a nun in the Catholic tradition. She was one of the people, Miriam, I just want to really highlight and hold that out. I think that's a really important comment. So, and I think the fact that people with disabilities exist and live in the world is beautiful, and that we should enable a world where everyone can thrive. So what are the sources that we turn to? This was one of the comments that Herb had made, right? Like, what happens when there's not enough text and we have disparate opinions? What sources can we turn to say, I have a leg to stand on when I say I belong, and queer inclusion is important to Jewish community? Well, this is adapted from Margaret Farley. She talks about this in a Christian way. She says, how do you craft a contemporary sexual ethics for a religious community? And she says there are 5 sources that you have to turn to. So one would be our sacred Jewish texts, right? We have to look at the Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash, right? All of the texts that we hold as part of our learning canon. I think we have to look at responsive literature, right? Those questions and answers over all different time periods, including modern ones, from all of the movements to give us an idea of where queerness fits into Jewish community. We have to look at the liturgy and the prayer books. What's emphasized and de-emphasized in our liturgy and in our prayer books, right? there are different messages that we receive when we think, I'm thinking so much about this, Herb, since you said it, about Yom Kippur, and what happens when we confess to the sexual boundary crossings, right? Even in the Reform movement, we speak about it, and it just says sexual transgressions. There's no specific translation that says homosexuality in my prayer book, right? And so that's a message to me, right? I wish it was a little bit more of an explicit message, but that's a message to me that it doesn't say Mishkav Zachor is the thing that we're talking about in particular, right? We have to look at contemporary scholarship, and that does not just mean Jewish contemporary scholarship, but the Torah and the knowledge of the world, right? What do we get? What message do we get from the fact that the American Psychological Association has increasingly depathologized our identities as queer people? What do we get from the message that the American Pediatric Association finds it unethical to refuse gender affirming care to people of all ages who need it, right? We have to take a message from that. And the fifth one, I think, is the one that a lot of Jewish communities have left out. Even my Reform community, and I'll give an example in a minute, but we've left out the embodied experience of queer people, right? This is what Stephen Greenberg means when he says, I need to be among the legitimate interpreters of that verse in Leviticus in my Orthodox community in order for anyone in the Jewish world to know what that verse means. The meaning is incomplete until our voices and experiences are heard and not corrected or excluded or erased, right? Our embodied experiences have to be included. So one of the ways where I think my movement had missed the mark on this is one of our most recent responsa, whatever, plural, singular, is, yeah, people are fine with gender affirming care when it's hetero and cis related. Think of all the people who take Viagra. That is 100% gender affirming care for somebody, right? We don't think of it that way because we don't pathologize, right, straight expressions of sexuality, especially male straight expressions of sexuality, right? We have a responsum on a couple who sort of incorrectly assumed themselves to be straight when their marriage was conducted. And then one of the partners came out to herself and to her partner as a trans woman, came out publicly, and they asked their rabbi, do we need a new ketubah? And the responsum committee, like, you know, they go through the task of looking at halakha, at Jewish law, and they come to the answer that this couple does not need a new ketubah because the person is the same legally as they were before she transitioned. And I think that's the wrong answer, because I think the only answer is to turn to that couple, especially the trans partner in that couple, and to say, do you emotionally, spiritually, Jewishly, psychologically, religiously need a new ketubah? Because all that matters to me is, what does it feel like to look at the ketubah and see your dead name, you yourself being misgendered, right? And I would say it is, you do not Jewish legally need a new ketubah, right? We can say and acknowledge that position. And do you need a new ketubah as a queer person? Can we skip to the next slide, please? Keep going. This is all about how this was all 5 seconds ago. So, you know, the last thing I want to say before I have us ask a few questions, and then we'll say the blessing together at the end, Rabbi, if we can do that, is that we all have different relationships to the words that are here. And I understand that for some folks, the word queer is really harmful, has been and continues to be used as a slur. I was called queer in the Boston accent. It wasn't fun to hear. I did not like it. It was hurtful to me. But I think we have fooled ourselves into thinking that if we get people to say the right words or stop saying the wrong words, we will change their minds. And that did not work. Because what we need to change their minds about is how they perceive us, is how much we are accepted in our variance in modern society, right? So when my dad says, take off your necklace, because people are going to know that you're queer. You're advertising your sex life, right? That's as if saying taking off my necklace was going to keep me safe. Now, leaving the necklace on did expose me to some vulnerability in certain contexts for sure, right? And I don't want to discount that, but it didn't keep me safe or make me belong anywhere else, right? What kept me safe and made me belong is that when my wife and I said that we were going to have a wedding before it was legal anywhere, my father's only and first reaction was, well, you got to have at least 150 people, right? Which meant, let's celebrate you. You don't have to edit yourself. Let's do this, right? Let's go. Let's skip to the next page. Yeah, my dad's pretty awesome. And actually we can take the take this down and just let's have a few questions, reactions, responses. Queer Nation. Yes, I learned from a Queer Nation elder, Henry A. Below. And yeah, I think Herb, you're right. There are different blessings to respect people. Now, I think that for me, I want to center the person who's having the experience, right? The disabled person or the queer person, right? And say, do you think of your identity as something that you have overcome and you want us to acknowledge it in that way? Or do you think of your identity as a variation to celebrate, right? Not defined from the outside, right? Questions, responses, reactions to this idea that we should celebrate variation rather than tolerate abnormality.
If it's okay, can I just read one comment that was earlier? Oh, actually,
Yeah.
no, I see that Amy has her hand up. So
great, Amy.
Long run, I think it would be nice if it simply went to everyday acceptance. So we don't necessarily have to celebrate anything.
Yes, right. I don't need to be like tokenized. And like when my wife and I had our Urfruf, our pre-wedding blessing, and our very well-meaning rabbi was like, see, there are lesbians in our community, right? That's not celebrating me so much as patting oneself on the back for how awesome one's community is, right? It's different than when there was a baby naming at a Reform synagogue that I went to, and Rabbi Andy Bachman calls up the two moms, and a woman in front of me says, I don't understand, where's the father? And someone next to her says, I think there isn't any father. And she goes, oh, right? That was acceptance. The difference between oh and oh. I love Jessica saying, I don't need to fit in. I can be that person, right? I've had family members say, why do you have to always teach about queer and poly and convert identity? And I'm like, well, number one, I'm an expert. I literally have a PhD in some of these things, right? Number two, I have that experience. Number three, because I don't want to pretend that I'm not who I am. Right. I do not want to stand up and say Rabbi Nikki Kramer and change my name to my wife's last name, which was suggested to me right before ordination, because I was told that it would be easier for me to get a job because congregations would not then discriminate against me for being a convert. And I thought, oh, I would rather them discriminate against me so I don't have to work there. Because like my father died almost 15 years ago now. I don't want to have to deny his last name, right? We've got this really beautiful way of understanding as individuals, right? Even as Felix is saying, as a cis gay man, right? We are programmed by society to try to be a certain way. We know this because we are Jews, right? We are weird people, right? We were that strange people in Egypt that Pharaoh was suspicious of, right? And we've seen in many ways how hiding the Jewishness of ourselves, right, did not protect us as Jews. Hiding the queerness of ourselves is not going to protect us as queer. Now, I want to just say, that doesn't mean that you walk around advertising everything about yourself in every context, right? There's still an issue of our physical and emotional safety. What I am saying is we can create Jewish communities, right, in which queer people do not have to worry about our physical safety because we are accepted as we are. The person who said, I want to do this more, you can do this more, which would be by joining me for Queering the Weekly Parsha, which we're starting up in October when all the other La'asok study groups begin. I'm going to bring each time a passage from the book Torah Queries, and I'm going to bring section from the weekly Parsha, and I'm going to other texts as we need, and for all of you to bring the text that is yourselves to that class. Can I ask us to say this bracha together? If you would share, Micah, that second to last slide.
Yes, coming. There we go.
So, and I've done this in the masculine God language. If you study with me further, we will be doing this in the non-binary Hebrew projects, non-binary plural to refer to God. But we say in gratitude, and I say really truly in gratitude for all of you here, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, mishaneh habriot.
Amen. Let me thank Rabbi Nikki for this incredible hour of study, just so deeply grounded in Jewish tradition and also so affirming. And all of you for being here, for being part of this conversation. I want to thank our three sponsors, partners, the Union for Reform Judaism, A Wider Bridge, and Keshet. Please do check out the work that they are doing as well. And finally, just to reiterate, if you want to study with Rabbi Nikki more, please come study with Rabbi Nikki more. Starting in October, she'll be leading a weekly Queering the Parsha study group that will meet for 1 hour a week on Thursday afternoon, Thursdays at 1:15 Eastern time on Zoom, and we would love to have any of you join us. So you can just shoot me an email. I'll put my address in the chat one more time, and I would be thrilled to talk with you about it or connect you with Rabbi Nikki so you can find out more about it from her. Once again, thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you to Rabbi Nikki for teaching us, and have a really good week, everyone.